Melody, who for a long time chose to stay silent while he publicly shared his perspective. Instead of engaging in online arguments or responding to statements, she kept her distance and handled things privately. Her silence was not out of weakness, but rather a sign of patience and control, as she quietly observed everything and carefully considered her next steps. During this time, she focused on her personal life, her children, and her future stability. She avoided social media drama and instead turned her attention toward more serious matters, including financial security, custody concerns, and long-term planning. Rather than reacting emotionally, she began making decisions based on logic and future outcomes. Meanwhile, he continued speaking about growth, change, and self-improvement, but many felt that his actions did not always match his words. He sometimes made indirect comments that appeared connected to past relationships, even while claiming he had moved forward. He also reintroduced Arian into public discussions, which led some people to question his intentions and whether it was being used to shift attention away from deeper issues. As time passed, more claims and reports began circulating online involving financial matters, private messages, and behind-the-scenes details. While not everything was confirmed, the information raised concerns for many viewers and led to increased scrutiny. Fans began comparing old footage with new statements, noticing inconsistencies and questioning what they had previously believed. At the same time, Melody remained largely quiet publicly. She did not engage in public disputes or emotional responses online. Instead, she focused on rebuilding her life, prioritizing her goals, and protecting her peace. Her silence continued to stand out, showing discipline and emotional control rather than avoidance. Eventually, it became clear that she had fully stepped away from public back-and-forth discussions and was no longer participating in the narrative being presented online. Without her active involvement, the situation began to shift, and more people started analyzing the story more critically. Meanwhile, his online presence continued, sometimes appearing emotional or inconsistent, which only added to public confusion. Arian also became more visible again online, posting about healing and personal growth, but many people felt the timing and tone of these posts seemed strategic rather than fully natural. This led to further debate among viewers, especially as older events were being re-examined with new context. As more details surfaced, public opinion began to change. What once brought sympathy and support now led to questions and doubt. The audience started paying closer attention to patterns, contradictions, and behavior over time. In contrast, Melody continued to stay focused on her private life, choosing stability, her child's well-being, and long-term planning over public attention or reaction. As the situation continued developing, it became more obvious that the public narrative was shifting quickly. People were no longer just accepting statements at face value. Instead, they were rechecking old interviews, episodes, and social media posts to understand what really happened over time. This deeper look made some viewers feel that earlier versions of events did not fully match what was now being revealed, which only increased skepticism and discussion online. At the same time, his behavior in public became more closely watched. Some noticed that his messages about growth and healing were often followed by emotional or defensive posts, which made it harder for people to clearly understand where he stood. Instead of creating a stable image, the inconsistency added confusion and made audiences question whether real progress was actually being made or just being talked about. Meanwhile, Melody continued to remain out of the public spotlight. She did not respond to rumors or participate in online debates, and she avoided turning personal matters into public content. Her focus stayed on real-life responsibilities rather than online reactions. Over time, this approach began to stand out even more, especially as the surrounding noise increased. While others were reacting publicly, she stayed centered on building structure and stability in her life. As discussions grew louder online, more people began to separate emotion from observation, trying to understand the situation based on actions rather than words. This shift in perspective changed how many viewed the entire story. What once looked like a simple relationship conflict now appeared more complex, involving communication breakdowns, trust issues, and long-term consequences that could not be easily explained in short clips or social media posts. Even with all the attention, the core situation did not settle. Instead, it kept evolving as new claims, interpretations, and reactions continued to surface. Each new detail added another layer, making it harder for a single version of the story to dominate public opinion. At this point, people were no longer just reacting emotionally, they were analyzing patterns and forming their own conclusions based on consistency and behavior over time. Through all of this, Melody's approach remained steady. She continued prioritizing her private life, focusing on her children and her future without engaging in public disputes. Her silence, combined with her distance from the ongoing narrative, reinforced the idea that she had chosen a different path, one centered on stability rather than attention. As the situation moved forward, that contrast between public reaction and private restraint became one of the most noticeable parts of the entire story. As the situation continued to unfold, that contrast only became more visible. While online conversations kept intensifying, Melody's approach stayed unchanged. She didn't react to new claims or engage with shifting narratives, even as speculation around her name continued to circulate. Instead, she maintained her distance and stayed focused on her personal responsibilities, allowing her actions in real life to speak louder than anything happening online. Over time, this quiet consistency started to change how some people viewed her. What was once interpreted as silence was now seen by many as discipline and emotional control. Rather than being pulled into ongoing debates, she appeared committed to staying grounded and avoiding unnecessary conflict. This helped her maintain stability, especially while the public discussion around her remained unpredictable and constantly changing. On the other hand, the public conversation around him remained active and often mixed. Some moments showed attempts to present growth and reflection, while other moments appeared more reactive or defensive. This back-and-forth behavior made it difficult for audiences to settle on a single perception, and it continued to fuel discussion across social platforms. Each new statement or appearance added to the ongoing uncertainty rather than settling it. As more time passed, people began to separate entertainment from reality more carefully. Instead of reacting to every new claim, many started looking at long-term patterns, how situations developed over time, how responses changed, and whether actions consistently matched words. This shift in focus changed the tone of the conversation, making it less about individual moments and more about the overall picture. In the middle of all this, Arian's renewed presence online also became part of the discussion. Her posts about healing and growth were interpreted in different ways depending on perspective, with some seeing them as genuine and others questioning the timing. This added another layer to an already complicated situation, keeping public attention divided and opinions mixed. Despite all the external noise, Melody's path remained steady. She continued building her life privately, prioritizing her children, her long-term security, and her peace of mind. She did not attempt to compete with narratives or control public perception. Instead, she stayed consistent in her decision to move forward without public confrontation. As a result, the overall situation began to take on a clearer shape for many observers. It was no longer just a series of online reactions or isolated statements, but a longer story shaped by behavior, choices, and consequences over time. And within that larger picture, the difference between public performance and private action became increasingly clear. As things continued to develop, the gap between public perception and private reality became even more noticeable. Online discussions kept growing, but instead of settling the situation, each new wave of information seemed to raise more questions. People were no longer just reacting to headlines or clips, they were trying to piece together a timeline, compare past statements, and understand how everything connected over time. During this period, Melody's consistency became one of the few stable points in the entire situation. She remained out of public conversations, avoided responding to speculation, and continued focusing on her personal responsibilities. While many others were caught up in ongoing debates and shifting narratives, She stayed committed to building a structured and peaceful life away from external pressure. This approach helped her maintain clarity, even as the situation around her became more complicated. At the same time, the broader conversation surrounding him continued to fluctuate. Some moments suggested reflection and accountability, while others came across as defensive or unclear. Because of these shifts, public opinion remained divided, with different groups interpreting the same actions in completely different ways. Instead of reaching a resolution, the inconsistency kept the discussion alive and often intensified it. As scrutiny increased, people began to look more closely at long-term behavior rather than isolated moments. This meant examining patterns over time, how situations were handled, how responses changed under pressure, and whether personal growth was reflected in consistent actions. This type of analysis made the conversation less emotional and more observational, changing how many viewed the entire situation. Arian's presence in the public space continued to be part of the discussion as well. Her online activity and messages about personal healing were viewed through different lenses, with some audiences accepting them at face value while others questioned the timing and context. This added yet another layer of complexity, keeping attention split across multiple angles of the story. Even with all of this unfolding, Melody did not shift her approach. She remained focused on her private life, her children, and long-term stability. She did not engage in public back and forth exchanges or attempt to influence the narrative. Instead, she allowed time and consistency to define her position rather than reacting to external pressure. As the situation progressed, it became increasingly clear that public attention alone was not shaping the full story. Instead, it was the contrast between what was being said and what was being consistently done that stood out most. Over time, that difference began to shape how many people understood the situation as a whole, not through isolated statements, but through sustained behavior and long-term patterns. As time went on, that contrast between words and actions became even more important in how people interpreted the situation. The more the public discussion continued, the more people started focusing less on individual statements and more on consistency over time. Instead of reacting to every new update, many began stepping back and looking at the broader pattern of behavior, trying to understand what had remained steady and what had constantly changed. In that wider view, Melody's approach continued to stand out for its consistency. She remained focused on her private life without being drawn into public debates or responding to ongoing speculation. Even as conversations around her name continued online, she stayed committed to her own path, prioritizing her children, her peace of mind, and long-term stability. This steady approach gave her a sense of control in a situation that was otherwise unpredictable and constantly shifting. At the same time, the public conversation surrounding him continued to move in different directions. Some moments suggested reflection, while others appeared more reactive, which kept audiences uncertain about the overall direction of his actions. Because of this inconsistency, people interpreted the situation in different ways, leading to ongoing debate rather than a clear conclusion. Each new appearance or statement added another layer, but did not fully resolve the questions that had already been raised. As more time passed, the focus of the discussion shifted again. Instead of short-term reactions, people began paying closer attention to long-term behavior, including how situations were handled under pressure and whether real change could be seen through actions rather than words. This made the conversation more analytical, with audiences comparing past and present behavior to look for patterns that either supported or contradicted public claims. Arian's continued presence in the discussion also remained part of the wider narrative. Her online activity and messages about personal growth were still being interpreted in different ways, with opinions split between those who viewed them as genuine and those who questioned their timing and context. This ongoing division added yet another layer to an already complicated situation, keeping public attention spread across multiple angles. Despite all of this continued noise, Melody's approach did not change. She stayed removed from public back-and-forth exchanges and avoided participating in the ongoing narrative. Instead, she focused on building stability in her personal life and maintaining a clear direction for her future. Her actions remained consistent, even as the environment around her continued to shift. Over time, this consistency began to influence how the overall situation was understood. What once felt like a series of separate events started to look more like a long-running pattern shaped by behavior, decisions, and consequences. And within